to introduce our speaker tonight. We have with us Debbie Riker. She's a graduate of Loma Linda University occupational therapist, and she's been doing that for several years, and she's been involved in driving education and therapeutic testing of driving, and she will talk to you a lot about the types of people that she trains and how she goes about it. She's a driving rehabilitation specialist. She's a certified dementia trainer. She's a certified geriatric wellness instructor. She has a service that is her own business, which is called the Adaptive Driving Center. And she is one that actually comes to your home for instructions, for evaluation. She's in contact with your doctor. You do not have to go to a place of business. She comes to you. So here we are. Please welcome Debbie Riker.
Thank you. Since I work with older adults, I tend to talk really loud, so if I'm talking too loud, let me know. Okay, so just to make sure y'all are awake, I'm going to ask you a question, a quiz question. True or false? Most older drivers cease or restrict their own driving when they experience changes to their ability to drive. How many think that's true? Y'all who raised your hands are right. The population that doesn't give up driving are the people who have cognitive impairment, and they don't know that they're not safe to drive anymore, and so they keep driving. Okay, so what does it mean to be able to drive? What does it mean to have your driver's license? Freedom. What else? Independence. You can go wherever you want to go, whenever you want to go. It's nothing in Southern California to drive 45 minutes to go to dinner. We're people who use our cars all the time. We usually get licensed as teenagers. And I remember when I was almost 16, I was counting down the days till I could go to the DMV and take my test and get my license. So it's a big deal to us, and it's a big deal as we age to be able to go all over wherever we want to go, whenever we want to go too. So the things that we have to do, the requirements to maintain our license, we have to have good vision, we have to follow the traffic signs, we have to know the laws of the state of California, we have to be medically safe to drive, and then sometimes people will need retesting on the road if it's medically indicated. So the question is, who is a candidate for a driving evaluation? Who would come to me? Why would they come to me? So there has to be some kind of a disability. Either there's a physical issue, a medical issue that's caused physical problems, there may be a visual problem, or cognitive. My specialty is testing people who have some sort of cognitive impairment. And most of the people that I test have dementia. I also see people who have Parkinson's or have had a stroke. So most of the people that I see do have a cognitive impairment. Sometimes people have their license suspended because of medical or visual conditions, or a person may be born with a disability, and so that's why they may need a driving assessment. A normal aging person may say, hey, I just want to be tested just to make sure that I'm safe to drive. So these are the top reasons that older adults will stop driving. If a person has visual impairment, if you have trouble seeing street signs, for example, you might be nervous about driving. And so that's why some older adults will stop driving. Some people, as they age, become more emotional and they get angry easier or nervous. And so that's another reason that older adults may give up driving. And then there's diminished cognitive abilities. So I'm going to go through the cognitive abilities throughout this lecture, so you'll hear more about it. And then slower reaction time. It's normal for us to have slower reaction time as we age. Sometimes there are medical conditions, including medications, that can cause difficulty with driving. So it's really important if you're on medications to talk to your pharmacist and ask them, does this interfere with my driving? You'd be surprised at some of the medications that will interfere with driving, like antihistamines. I didn't expect that would interfere with driving, but it can. So it's something you need to talk to your pharmacist about to make sure that you're safe to drive. And it's very expensive to have a car. It's expensive to buy a car. It's expensive to maintain it. And insurance and gas, especially with our gas prices going way up right now. So sometimes people give up driving because they're having financial difficulties. If a person has a pattern of close calls, it's another reason that they may give up driving. And then a lack of confidence. How many of you love getting on the freeway and driving? I don't. It's scary to get out there and drive. And so I'm always really on the alert, especially when I'm on the freeway. Sometimes other people will encourage someone to stop driving. And then the last one is loss of a license. But I tested a 92-year-old gentleman a few years ago who lost his license, and his attorney called me. And he had caused an accident. Somebody died in the accident. He lost his license because of the accident and went to a dealership and bought a brand new sports car, paid cash for it. Apparently, they never asked for his driver's license because he didn't have one. And so when I went out to test him, he gave me his driver's license, but it was actually a California ID. So that means he didn't even remember that somebody took him to the DMV because he had his license revoked and he got this California ID. But he was still driving, and his attorney was very nervous about him driving. So we can go through a lot of visual changes as we age, and these are the visual acuity and all those things are the things that we need for our vision to work right so that we can drive. It's a part of driving. So visual acuity is the ability to see a moving object. So when you're driving, you're going to see a lot of moving objects out there, right? You have to be able to track all those cars around you, pedestrians, bicyclists, all that stuff. The next one is depth perception. So do you have any idea what the most common accident is that a person living with dementia causes? It's a left-hand turn with oncoming traffic. And the reason for that is because when a person has dementia, they lose their depth perception. And so a person with dementia doesn't know how far away the cars are or how fast they're coming. And so a person with dementia is going to automatically, in the beginning stages, begin to lose their depth perception. The other thing is your useful field of view. So this is the area that you can see and you can process that information. So what I want you to do is, don't hit the person beside you, but put your arms straight out to the side. Don't hit the person beside you. Look straight ahead, look at me, wiggle your thumbs and tell me if you can see your thumbs. Probably you can't, because our field of view changes as we age. So at age 70, it's about like this. So look straight at me, can you see your thumbs now? That's for your useful field of view. So that means you can see this all the time when you're driving. But this area over here and over here, unless we look, we don't see that area normally because our vision changes as we age. So that's why it's so important to look carefully, especially when you're making lane changes. The next one is contrast sensitivity. So that's your ability, for example, if there's a bank of green bushes and trees and there's a green car driving in front of those bushes, you have to be able to see the difference between the green car and the bushes. Or if it's a gray, foggy day and there's a gray car, you have to be able to see the difference between those two things. So your perceptual reaction time is the speed that you process information, seeing something and then responding to it. And then glare recovery is recovering from oncoming headlights. Have any of you been temporarily blinded at night by headlights? Yeah, some of them are very bright. And if it's a truck, they tend to be high. And those doggone halogen lights really blind you. And then our peripheral vision we talked about, and the light-dark adaptation. So if you're driving into a real shaded neighborhood with lots of trees and then you go into the sun, your eyes have to change. But what happens as we age, as our pupils don't change as rapidly as they did when we were 16 years old. The other thing is there's diseases of the eye. So cataracts is just a general blurry vision. So with glaucoma, I want you to make binoculars and put it up to your eyes. This is what it would be like to drive with glaucoma. Because you can't see the periphery. All you can see is the middle. So with macular degeneration, make a fist, put it a few inches in front of your eyes. This is what it would be like to drive with macular degeneration. You can only see the periphery, but not the middle. So how does dementia affect driving? First thing that typically goes is the short-term memory. It depends on the type of dementia. There's over 70 different types of dementia. But especially with Alzheimer's disease, they tend to lose their short-term memory quickly. And then the abstract reasoning also starts to go if a person has dementia. One of the most common questions I get when I test someone who has dementia and they get into the test car, we use a test car with dual brakes because we don't want to drive in the individual's car without it. So one of the most common questions I get is, where's the gas pedal and the brake? That is abstract reasoning. You have to have good abstract reasoning to be able to drive, and that's just one example of abstract reasoning. But a person with dementia doesn't understand that gas pedal and brake pedal. It's the same in every single car. And also judgment. A person with dementia doesn't have good judgment and they don't self-regulate, and so they will continue driving even when they're unsafe to drive. Reaction time becomes very, very slow with dementia. And they also have difficulty with executive function. So that's problem solving, making decisions, remembering all the stops that you have to make, searching for addresses. I tested one woman who got lost. She went to the hairdresser 2 blocks from her house and got lost for 5 hours trying to drive back. And I asked her, why did you get lost? And she said, well, there's construction by the beautician and I forgot where my house was. And that was just a simple 2 block drive, but she drove for 5 hours and finally a police officer stopped her and helped her get home. And I just imagine the terror that she was feeling at not knowing where she was, not knowing how to get home. I felt so sorry for her, but that's the kind of thing that can happen with people who have dementia. And then I already mentioned the depth perception is impaired. And then visual processing skills are impaired with dementia. So seeing things and processing it in the brain and then responding to it, that whole system slows down when a person has dementia. So what changes with normal aging? Our ability to focus on close-up objects. How many of you have tried to read your pill bottle or the menu in the restaurant and you're moving it back and forth? Our vision changes, and so it's hard to focus on those things. And then our ability to switch from near to far. So if you're looking at your gauges in your car to see how fast you're driving or how much gas you have or something along those lines, and then looking ahead to see what the traffic is doing. You have to constantly switch back and forth when you're driving. And then our peripheral vision, as I said, at about age 70, it's down to this much. So it does get smaller as we age, and it's a normal aging. A lot of people have arthritis as they age. And so it can affect how you turn the steering wheel. It can affect the handles, all the controls in the car. It's common for people to have back and neck pain as well. One of the things that the DMV insists on, if you ever have to take a driving test with a DMV, is before you make a lane change, you have to look over your shoulder. Every car has a blind spot, and that's why they insist that you look over your shoulder before making a lane change. You don't have to drive like this. You just make a quick turn around to make sure that nobody's in that lane. And then there's loss of high frequency sounds. I tested a woman, and just after the driving instructor said to her, make a left turn at the next intersection, just when he finished that, we both heard these two emergency vehicles, and then we saw a fire truck and ambulance driving by. The woman did not see or hear them, and she tried to drive into the intersection. The driving instructor had to stop her. It just so happened when we were driving the other direction back to her home, the same two vehicles were going the other way. She did the same thing. She tried to drive into the intersection with them coming through it. So she had lost her high frequency sound hearing. We also have to have good divided attention. And you may have already read the reports about this, but the human brain is not made to divide attention. It's called multitasking. However, when we drive, there's so many things that we have to pay attention to. So what are all the things we have to look at when we're driving? Other cars, pedestrians, lights, traffic lights, bicycles. We have to know what all the laws of California say. We have to understand what the signs mean. And then we're getting all these new traffic lights in the intersections. Like, have you seen the flashing yellow turn light? Yeah. That's something that's fairly new. So if you get into one of those intersections where they put in a brand new light and you don't know what that means, you have to figure it out quickly. So we have to multitask constantly when we're driving. As we age, our processing of signals slows down in the brain, and so it makes it more difficult to drive. And then our sensory perception can also become weaker. One of the things I always look at when I'm doing the driving assessment is, does a person have peripheral neuropathy? If they have lost feeling in their feet, how are they going to put their foot on the right pedal? And I often will test people who grew up on the farm driving the tractor, and they drive two-footed. And what happens is they'll forget to take a foot off one of the pedals, and it makes them drive inaccurately. If they're trying to stop but their foot's pressing on the gas pedal, it makes for difficult driving. And then as we age, our brain needs more information to make a decision, so that means it can take a little bit longer for us to make decisions. And we have to make them quickly when we're driving. So making the decision whether to drive or not, driving abilities are not only age-related, they're also function-related. And that's one of the things that occupational therapists are all about, is function. How is a person functioning? So NHTSA is the National Highway and Traffic Safety Administration, and they do ongoing studies about all kinds of issues related to driving. So the research that they are doing confirms that as we age, our vision changes, our reflexes change, and it's typical that our physical fitness changes too. Okay, so here are red flags according to the National Highway Transportation Safety Office. If a person has difficulty reading street signs, if they see someone that they know really well across the street but they don't recognize who they are, one of the things I see all the time for a person who is living with dementia is that they have difficulty staying in the lane. And so they'll go in and out of the lane all the time. They also have difficulty seeing pavement markings, curbs, all these things. It's hard for them to see it and process the information. And then, of course, as we age, it's harder for us to recover from the glare from oncoming headlights. Sometimes there's cognitive changes that can happen as well as we age. So sometimes it's harder. If your depth perception is not good, it's harder to judge the distance between cars. So I've seen some older adults who will park, or stop rather, way behind another car because they may not know how big that gap is, and so they want a lot of space to be able to be safe. Turning left at intersections can be difficult as well, and then merging with traffic. Sometimes people get lost or confused when they're driving, like the woman I told you about who went to the hairdresser and she got lost 2 blocks from her home. And then there's other medical conditions that can cause difficulty as well, like dizziness or seizures or loss of consciousness. Sometimes people don't like driving on the freeway because of how fast people go. How many people on the freeway drive 65 miles an hour? Not too many. And so it demands a lot of multitasking from you to be able to drive on the freeway. Sometimes it's hard to see in the periphery. So remember, our periphery at 70 is about this. So if there's a car coming out of a driveway here, you may not see that car unless you specifically are looking back and forth to make sure that you're safe to go. And sometimes people get overwhelmed with all the signs and signal lights and everything that's going on. And then NHTSA also talks about the physical changes. So again, you need to look over your shoulder, just make a comfortable, quick look to make sure it's safe to make lane changes. But sometimes people have difficulty because they may have arthritis in the neck. And so it may be difficult for them to turn their head. Also, moving your foot from pedal to pedal. If a person is wearing an AFO, so if you've ever heard of foot drop, sometimes a person has to wear an AFO so it keeps their foot from dropping. You cannot legally drive with an AFO because it interferes with your sensation of feeling the pedal.
What did the letters stand for?
That's a very good question, and I'm blanking on that right now. I'll get back to you. I'm an occupational therapist, and physical therapists are the ones. It's an ankle-foot orthosis.
Thank you.
You're welcome. You have one on? Okay. If you want to see it, we have a living example here. And then if a person has fallen, it may be an indication of a physical change that the person is going through. One of the most important things you can do for your health is to exercise on a regular basis. So if you can't walk around the block or walk for 20 minutes a day, if you're incapable of doing that, it may mean that your health is not the same as what it used to be. So I really encourage you to get exercise. You have to do it at your pace and what you can comfortably do and what you're safe to do, but it's important for you to keep up your strength. And then you should be able to raise your arms over your shoulders. So if this is the only range of motion you have, it's likely that you can't turn the steering wheel accurately. I see some people with arthritis who are driving like this, and it's scary to be in the car with them because every time they make that switch, it jerks the steering wheel. So you should be able to turn the steering wheel smoothly. But if you have arthritis and you can't move your shoulders, you're going to have difficulty with making accurate turns. And then if you're feeling any pain in your knees or legs or ankles, if you're going up and down stairs, for example, or doing a lot of walking, that can be a physical change as well. So most older drivers restrict their own driving. Most people will stay in their own neighborhood. They don't do a lot of driving. They don't drive in the rain. We don't get much rain in Southern California, so it doesn't matter too much here. But there are ways that people will restrict their driving so that they're still safe to drive. So if you're concerned about any of these things, my suggestion is to talk to your physician about it, and you can express what your concerns are. See if there's any changes that your doctor's concerned about as well. So how do we get started on the driving assessment? So typically, I get a call from the family member or from the doctor saying, you need to test so-and-so for driving. I did have one woman down in Leisure World who called me and said, my boyfriend and I are concerned about our driving and we want to be tested. My boyfriend's going to be tested first. And he didn't pass and she refused to be tested. So what we're looking at the medical history is what medications is the person taking, their driving history, their license, if they actually have an actual driver's license or if it's a California ID, what their expectations and goals are for driving, and then their self-appraisal. How do they think they're doing with driving? I tested one retired guy who I asked him if he had any accidents or tickets? And he said, no, I haven't. Well, the reason he was referred to me by a colleague is that the place where he lived, every time he came and went, he would play bumper boat with the cars in the parking lot, and he'd back up and hit a car, and then go forward and hit a car, and keep doing that until he was able to get out of the parking lot. So we're looking at all these things in the clinical assessment. You have good range of motion, visual acuity, processing skills, all of those things. And then we look at the physical abilities. Do you have the ability to turn the steering wheel and all the other things that are needed? So do you see a number in this? Anybody see a number? I'm testing your vision now. 6. Yeah, it's a 6. So we do visual testing as well to make sure that a person has accurate vision to be able to drive.
So should we be able to see a number there?
Well, some people have different visual problems, eye problems, and so not everybody will see that. Especially if you have any kind of color blindness, you may not see that. So the DMV, this is what they require, that you have 20/40 with both eyes tested together, 20/40 in one eye or at least 20/70 in the other. And if you wear corrective glasses, at least one eye with the glasses has to be 2200. So then behind the wheel, what we're looking for, does a person need any adaptive equipment? And then the big thing is this person just having poor driving habits, or do they have a cognitive impairment? And that's what I'm looking at when I'm testing older adults. Are the observations that I'm seeing with their driving, is that typical of the age group, or could it be related to a medical condition? We're looking at how they follow the laws of California, if they pay attention to all the signal lights and all the signs and everything that's out there, if they can keep the car in the correct lane position, if they know the difference between the gas pedal and the brake. I had one person who was reading the odometer instead of the, yeah, and so they didn't know what speed they were actually going. Okay, so if a person gets a referral to the DMV, then what will happen is they'll go through a hearing, and then if they pass the hearing, then they'll go through the vision test and the written test. And if they do well with that, then they will go on to have a driving test by the DMV. And so that's the process of the DMV. Sometimes people get restricted license. So the most common restrictions are they can't drive on the freeway, or maybe they need additional mirrors. It may be that they can only drive during daylight hours and not at night. Sometimes people wear bioptic lenses, and so those are special lenses that some people have to wear so that they can drive. It looks almost like small binoculars that are on their glasses. So what do you see in this picture? Do you see a young lady or an older lady? Interesting. So this is our perception. This is the way that we see things. And so we do testing as well with the perceptual, with the vision, to see how a person is able to see and process the information. So depending on how you're looking at it, you might see a young woman or you might see an older woman there. We also do a cognitive assessment. Is a person oriented? Do they have good enough memory so that they can remember all the laws of the state of California? Can they process information so they have to see it, process it in their brain, then respond to it physically? Can they multitask? We have to be able to multitask when we're driving. And you also have to have sustained attention. So one of the common things I see when I'm testing a person who has dementia is they will be talking to me and then they just totally forget what they're supposed to do with driving. And they'll make a lot of driving mistakes. They don't have that divided attention. And then we also look at reaction time. We have to have good reaction time to be able to drive a car. If you're driving in a neighborhood and you see a ball rolling out in front of your car, you're going to slam on that brake because there might be a little kid that's coming behind that ball. So we have to have really good reaction time. And then there's the behind the wheel assessment. So we use a dual controlled vehicle. There's always an occupational therapist and then a driving instructor. And we do all of the driving assessment part together. So we start out in the neighborhood, in the individual's neighborhood, let them drive a little bit to get used to the car, and then we'll go in busier traffic patterns. And we want the person to feel more safe with the car and feel like they have control over the car before they go in busier patterns. One gentleman I was testing, I already knew from his family that he was having issues with his driving. And so he said to me in the very beginning, I haven't been on the freeway for 4 years because I just don't feel comfortable driving. And what did he do? Drove right onto the freeway instead of staying on the road. And he did not know how to drive on the freeway. So what we're looking at behind the wheel is, does this person need any kind of adaptive equipment, or are they good to go with just the car? And then we're looking at driving behaviors. How do they operate the car? Are they able to get their foot between the gas and the brake pedal? We're looking at their behaviors, their patterns, all of those things. I'm looking for red flags throughout the testing to make sure that the individual has all of the skills that they need. And again, I'm looking whether they have poor driving habits or if there's some sort of cognitive impairment going on. And then I ask them at the end, do you think you did well? Did you make any mistakes? And typically for a person who has cognitive impairment, they'll say, I did great. I didn't make any mistakes at all. There was a gentleman I tested last weekend who decided to split a lane. Do you know what that means? So there were 2 lanes, and this was a turn lane, and it went into 2 lanes. And he decided that it was too inconvenient to sit and wait for that traffic to move. So he split the lane and drove in between those 2 cars. And we had inches on each side of the car. And the driving instructor had to grab the steering wheel to make sure we didn't hit either car on the way. That was scary. And then what I do is I put people in one of 3 categories. Either they're a low risk, they're a medium risk, which means that they need to take driving lessons, or they're a high risk. And then if they're not safe, then they need to retire from driving. So there's various reasons that a person may be referred for a driving assessment. So it's something that if you're concerned about it, I suggest you talk to your family or your doctor. There is a reporting law in California. We have the most stringent law of all the 50 states that a doctor has to report for certain conditions. Parkinson's is one, cognitive impairment is one, and stroke is one. So the doctors are supposed to report. Do they report? Most of them don't. Most of them don't. So again, if you get a review process notice from the DMV, I already explained that you have to go down to the DMV, they have a hearing, they talk to you. If you do well on the hearing, then they'll let you take the driving test and the written test and the vision test.
Do you have to report it to the DMV?
Repeat the question.
She asked if I have to report the results of the test to the DMV. I am not bound by law to do it, but when I'm testing somebody with a cognitive impairment and they are very unsafe to drive and they don't know that they're unsafe, I do report them to the DMV. Okay, are there any questions? Okay, so he wants to know about the AFO that's illegal to drive. The reason that they say it's illegal to drive with an AFO is because that piece of plastic that's underneath your foot can impair your ability to feel the pedal. And if you can't tell the difference between the gas and brake pedals with an AFO on, ankle foot orthosis, then you're not supposed to drive with it. The other thing that can stop you from driving is peripheral neuropathy. Sometimes people will get a tingling sensation in their feet, But what often happens is that people lose all sensation in their feet. And so in that case, they cannot drive because they can't feel the pedal. I've tested people with peripheral neuropathy, and they'll just guess where the pedal is and slam on whatever it is, a brake or gas pedal, because they don't have the sensation to put it in the correct position. They also don't have the sensation to push on the pedal as they are supposed to be pushing on it. They don't have the muscle feeling to do it and have the muscle work correctly. If you lose the vision in one eye, what happens is you can go to the DMV and you can have a test, and if they pass you, you can drive. But oftentimes they'll tell people they cannot drive. So it's case-by-case basis with the DMV. Well, thank you so much for your time. I appreciate it. Have a good evening.